Okay, brilliant. So, welcome everybody to tonight's Active Travel Cafe, led by myself, Steve Connor, supported by Adam and Robin, and with shortly a brilliant speaker from Wheels for Wellbeing. But before we do that, we'll do our crowdsourced news update from around the UK, England, the world, wherever we want to go. Pop your hand up if you've got an update. Bob was in first, super keen. Bob, over to you. What's happening?
Hi there, everybody. Okay, so let's kick off on this nice wet day with a couple of bits of bad news. You know me, I want to be honest with people. Okay, the first bit of bad news is that a year after it was due, we got the government's road safety strategy, which I mentioned last week. Um, we've done for Road Danger Reduction Forum, we've done a brief initial response explaining why we think it's very weak and we're very disappointed with it. Um, Other colleagues I've spoken to in the road danger reduction movement feel similarly. I won't go into exactly why it's so bad, but in the chat I'll put a link to our webpage, which does a couple of sides of what's wrong, and we'll do a more in-depth response to it. Um, it came out with other consultations as well, and the pavement parking consultation also came out, which didn't get much of a response because a lot of stuff was coming out on the same day. But anyway, I'll put the link to that in the chat. Um, the second bit of bad news is that Road Peace, the National Road Crash Victims Charity, um, has gone under. It's gone into liquidation. It was in trouble for a number of years. I started working with it 34 years ago when it started up, and we did have high hopes as it had a nominally road danger reduction commitment. That was watered down over the years, and I think it's one of the key reasons why it's failed. Again, I shall be posting on the RDRF website about that, but it is very sad that something which we had some hopes for has sort of come to grief. Um, so, two bits of bad news, and that's it.
From your tone of voice there, Bob, I thought you were going to lighten the mood with just a tiny little snippet of good news right at the end.
Well,
Just
I'm quite perked up by the Iranian protesters, frankly. I mean, I feel very good. You know, that's the sort of one thing which has made me feel that there's something good. Some people who are not tolerating bad stuff. You know.
thank you, Bob. If you can make the Iranian protester active travel link for us, it would be even more impressive. But thanks, Bob. No, that's really good to know. Robin, you were waving quite frantically. Did you want to come straight in before I bring Mark in?
Yeah, yes. I'm going to pick two little bits of what I thought were good news in the road safety strategy, which I don't know if Bob agrees with those, because I would agree with Bob on a lot of things. So I'm going to pick two good things. One is the target, because we haven't had a target for since I think about 2010, and that is one of the reasons that it hasn't got much focus. And the target of 65% reduction in people killed and seriously injured on the roads by 2035 is quite a demanding target. Obviously, targets demand follow through, and it's the question of whether that it will be followed through is the question. But we have just seen Transport Action Network win a legal case about whether a strategy is followed through or not and whether it gets funding. So that gives me some hope. And the other one is about the formation of the Road Safety Investigation Branch, which should give proper analysis of the most serious road crashes, as something that the Johnson government promised in 2022, failed to deliver. Not the only thing that government failed to deliver. And if we see that delivered, then that will also be a good thing. So a lot will, of course, depend on what's delivered. And there are I'm sure Bob will agree, lots more ways that they can fail to deliver this target than they can succeed in deliver it. So I'm not disagreeing with Bob, but I just thought I'd put those two positives. And the pavement parking response, 5 years we waited for it. And of course, I think we all knew it was going to be a local, it devolved to local institutions. I'm lucky my Oxfordshire County Council have already said, yes, we're going to be applying for the powers. And so we are going to end up with a postcode lottery. Oxfordshire, we're going to be fortunate they're going to be going for it, but other places, it is not going to be as good. So we are going to have to show that being tough on pavement parking is good for people.
Brilliant. Thanks, Robin. Good, good, good. Next up, Mark Strong from Brighton.
So I'm looking at a very archived webpage of the Times saying planners find a roundabout way to safe cycling at Danger Junction, November the 26th, 2012, which is the Palace Pier roundabout in Brighton. Work's just started on actually doing it. So that was a design that Phil Jones and I knocked up for the Times when it was positive about walking and cycling. So it's only taken however long that is, 13 years, just over 13 years to actually happen. So that's a minor bit of good news. So that's hopefully offsets a little bit of Bob's
Thank you.
depression.
I think Bob did a good balancing out there. So bringing in global politics to lift the mood. But thanks, Mark. Brilliant stuff. 14 years to deliver. Not too bad. Catherine in Dundee, over to you. What's your update? We know it's
Sorry,
struggling
just
to
fiddling
come
about with the
off.
mute button.
No,
So I'm
that's all right.
literally just reading this off my phone. It's just come out. The Scottish budget was announced today, and I'm just reading the press release from Cycling UK saying it's positive news for walking, wheeling, and cycling in Scotland. The rise in funding from 189 million to 226 million. So that's things moving in the right direction in Scotland, basically. It's not always a given that the money's going to be there, so that's kind of reassuring. We'll say that much.
Brilliant. That's great. Thanks, Catherine. That's a good bit of news. Lovely. Adam.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back onto the pavement parking. The options that were available, there were three options. I think option two was basically allow councils to dictate, and then option three was a sort of national sort of a position with exceptions being allowed from the councils. They've gone, I think, for what I'd call an option 2+, despite almost like 90% of people being interested in or wanting pavement parking banned. Even businesses, there wasn't any. And I think if you want to reflect back on this, if you think about the clean air zones that have come out and the various variances of those, you've got your basic C's and D's, where some, for example, Bath has, if you have a diesel car, you don't get charged. If you go into Bristol with an old diesel car, you do get charged. Yeah, and I think and even Greater Manchester basically politically wouldn't accept doing clean air zones at all, and Andy Burnham kind of pushed back on that, and that's not happened. So I think when we look at this, I think where we've ended up with this two plus model, because the plus bit is still to be consulted on. So in other words, we've had 1,834 days from the consultation to this report coming out, and now we have another consultation on what that plus is going to be. And now if that takes another 2-3 years, I still think we're going to be in a very problematic position. So, we've got the English devolution bill going through as well. So there may be something that can be done at a combined authority level. So you could see areas like combined authorities and unitary authorities within that effectively being able to use TCR money to do to basically put in place some of these pavement parking bans. But it could even come down to individual ward level sort of councillors and who decides what, at which point it becomes a very local political issue. And you can already see, every single, let's not beat around the bush, every single reform sort of candidate is going to say, we're going to remove all parking bans completely, et cetera, despite disability issues that it's causing. So I think we've ended up with a real mess where it's going to become exceptionally political and also extremely confusing, where somebody who's, say, drives from, I don't know, Basingstoke to Winchester finds out that, where in Basingstoke you can park anywhere, in Winchester you can't. Yeah, and they'll have to, so there'll be this real, I don't think it's viable what they've come up with, and I do think it's a huge political cop out, and I don't know why they didn't. But anyway, that's my take on it, and that lots of other people have got this. Yeah, but that plus is really, that the fact they're consulting on what that plus is really annoying. They should have absolutely have hammered this down and just gone with the consensus, with 80-90% of people saying ban pavement parking, and then have local councils being able to bring in exceptions for specific scenarios. That would have been so much better. Anyway, I can rant about this and I'll shut up now.
Thanks, Adam. Yes, we all think you could, and I'm sure lots of people will agree with you. Right, I'm going to go next to HND Global Nokia G42 5G, also known to their friends as H. H, do you want to come in?
Now, it's a bit problematic. Have you covered the sad news on road peace?
Yes, we have.
Yes.
H.
I'm pushing an agenda. It's actually been illegal to have a wheel of a carriage on a footway for 191 years now. And we could actually deal with all footway parking simply by one piece of secondary legislation. Section 72 of the 1835 Highways Act makes it illegal to drive or ride a carriage or beasts on a footway pavement. And there's a small matter of in flagrante delicto. In other words, you've got to have a policeman catch somebody driving their car on a footway. But technically, with a wheel of any car on any footway, it must ergo have been driven there, and the onus should be placed on the keeper of the vehicle to prove that it was lifted there by a crane or a helicopter. But the only way that that car can have a wheel on a footway is if it has been driven on a footway. And that has been illegal for 191 years now. So overnight, with a simple piece of secondary legislation, which does not require any form of act, every single motor vehicle, which is a carriage since 1903, with a wheel on a footway, can be prosecuted.
Brilliant.
Overnight, we could actually clear all the footway pavements of every carriage on the pavement. Think about it.
And H, I love it. I also fascinated whether we carry on punishing beasts on the footway as well. That's fascinating. Sorry, go on. H, I'm going to move us on because we've got to get to Kay in a second. So we've got Matthew and Ruth, and then I'm going to come to you, Kay, for your presentation. Matthew.
Thank you very much, Steve. Happy New Year, everyone. Just a quick little bit of sort of local government news from sunny Darlington. Continue to push for things here. A few years ago, I asked the then Conservative administration to move to sort of harm-based or pollution-based pricing for parking. Whether that be on street, off street, or residence parking zones. That was kicked firmly away as being too tough and something they didn't want to do. But as part of our review of residence parking zone, which has to come through, I managed to sweet talk the officer into putting one of the questions in the questionnaire to all residents in Darlington: do you think less polluting vehicles should get a lesser charge for parking with a permit? And we got quite a strong response. So, of course, flipping the table there, do you think less polluting cars should pay less, ergo more polluting cars should pay more? It was a minority, but it was a strong minority. So hopefully, as a member of our Communities and Local Services Scrutiny Committee, I'll be pushing that forward as part of the review of residence parking zones. And it is explicitly said in the paper that's coming tomorrow that this will inform on-street and off-street parking too. So as DVLA lookup gets easier with this modern tech, hopefully when you punch in your registration code in Darlington in future years, you'll pay extra if you have a Panzer or other other varieties of SUVs are available. Second thing, again, at the meeting tomorrow, I'm bringing a motion to set up a task and finish group, which is a deep dive into road harm. And this isn't purely when drivers kill people or injure people. It is, and I quote, a wider range of issues, including road collisions, but not exclusively, looking at environmental impacts, air, noise pollution, over-reliance on private vehicles, health impacts, physical inactivity, obesity, cancer, it goes on and on. We will be setting up, this was done with support of our local Director of Public Health, and it's a way of diluting the highways engineers' insistence on more and more tarmac and bringing in the wider health impacts of getting people out of their cars as much as we can and onto other forms of transport as much as possible. So the wheels of local government grind slowly, but we're making pace. And I may be tapping a few people up here to appear as witnesses at our recorded public meetings into the impacts of moving to an active transport model for Darlington. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Matthew, that was excellent. I love the flipping to less polluting cars. That's really good bit of framing. That's may have to steal that on a couple of projects we're working on. Ruth, over to you, and then I'm going to go to Kay.
Hello, everybody. Happy New Year. I'm in Holland, where, of course, it's all lovely, even though the weather's shit. Just to say, on pavement parking, the problem is the bigger the car, the less polluting the car there can be, and therefore the bonnet hangs over onto the pavement. So the wheels can be fully on the driveway, but the rest of the car sticks out. And my council don't do anything about that, because as long as the wheels are on the drive, that's legal. And it doesn't matter how much of the bonnet or the boot stick out across the pavement, drop curb, whatever. And we need to get rid of drop curbs as well, because as we know that once the car is sticking out, then for wheelchair users, buggy users, they're on an angle, and it should be raised tables all the way across the road, is all I wanted to say, but thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Brilliant stuff. Okay, good. Well, I think we've had a blend there of news updates and a lot of people getting stuff off their chest, which is a healthy way to start 2026. Kay, we're going to come to you. So next we've got our speaker, Kay Inckle. So Kay is I'll get this right, Kay, Campaigns and Policy Manager for Wheels for Wellbeing, and is going to take us through the Guide to Inclusive Cycling, the comprehensive guide to inclusive cycling. As I mentioned before, when Kay's speaking, if you have got questions for the Q&A session, please do use the Q&A function. It's at the bottom of your screen. Click on there, pop your question in, and then we'll know what follow-up questions to fire at Kay. But over to you, Kay.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. So if someone can just tell me that you can see the PowerPoint.
Yep, that's come up.
Slideshow. Okay, great. So yeah, thanks for inviting me along, although I think we might have invited ourselves to present at this session, because we really wanted to talk to you about the 5th edition of the Guide to Inclusive Cycling. And I've sort of tagged this session as everything you need to know about accessible active travel in one document. That's slightly overstated, but possibly not for the reasons that you might immediately think. I'm guessing a lot of people here know who Wheels for Wellbeing are and what we do, so I'm not going to say loads about it, other than we are an organisation. We're run by and for disabled people and work towards equitable access to cycling, active travel and multimodal journeys for disabled people. The picture on my cover slide, it's one of my favourite photos at the moment, and I think that really captures what we're aiming for. So this photograph is taken from a tryout session for our accessible cycle loan scheme, Wheels for Me, in London. So we have a hire scheme of non-standard cycles for disabled people. And the picture shows a woman who is a lower limb amputee trying out an ice trike, and she's being talked through how to comfortably fit her prosthetic foot to the pedal by a cycle instructor who is also a lower limb amputee. And what I love about that is that it really captures what our vision is, that it should be just as normal and expected to see disabled people participating in every element of cycling and active travel, be that as users of cycles, as instructors, mechanics, policy wonks, people designing infrastructure. We want that to be just as normal as it is currently to see a non-disabled middle-aged white man involved in cycling and active travel. So we want to do ourselves out of a job. Is that there should be no need for us to exist in the future that we imagine. But since we've got quite a way to go to get to our imagined future, we've recently launched the 5th edition of the Guide to Inclusive Cycling. It's still called the Guide to Inclusive Cycling, but really it's so much more than cycling now. So it covers active travel, it covers micromobilities, it covers some issues around mobility aids for disabled people, it covers multimodal journeys. So yes, much broader than cycling. We stuck with the Guide to Inclusive Cycling this year because it's the 5th edition of something that has become I guess something of a bit of a legendary publication within our organisation. But I think next time we do it, we'll be calling it something different to really try and capture what the content really is. So what I wanted to do today is just give you a sort of whirlwind tour of some of the things you can expect to find in it, and also a bit of hopefully a bit of a primer, so you actually want to have a look at it. The QR code on the screen should take you straight to it on the website. So the Guide to Inclusive Cycling, it's based on our organisational principles, which are the social model of disability, equity and mobility justice. But those principles also relate to legislation and policy, both in the UK and wider. So the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, the Equality Act in the UK, with the exception of Northern Ireland, where it's a bit different. And using those as a building block to really understand why we should and why we must make all aspects of active travel fully accessible. There's a range of different content. So there's evidence about disabled people, mostly around cycling at the moment. I mean, the evidence is quite patchy. There's not nationwide robust representative data. And again, this is something that we're really hoping to develop for the next iteration, looking at getting really good quality baseline data around disabled people in active travel. There are design and technical explainers, both about aspects of policy and campaigning, so including things like how to create and deliver a fully accessible and inclusive consultation. And there's also technical explainers about different aspects of facilities and infrastructure for accessible active travel. There's a new section on micromobilities, and we do consider micromobility to be part of active travel for disabled people. I know sometimes people think of micromobilities just purely in terms of e-scooters, and because for non-disabled people there's very limited physical exertion in using a standing e-scooter, it's assumed not to be active. But for people who are disabled, the fact that you're using your core, you're using hand-eye coordination, you're standing rather than seated, we will consider that to involve physical activity. There's a whole range of links and resources, both to our work and to national, international resources. And we have case studies, and a new case study for this edition is around neurodiversity in cycling. And again, that's something, it's a topic that we've been asked about a lot in the last 3 or 4 years. People being much more interested in understanding the barriers to neurodivergent people participating in cycling and active travel, and then also understanding some of the benefits and some of the areas where we do see participation by neurodivergent people. So that's a little bit about some of the content. In terms of where does all this come from? We consider ourselves to be thought leaders in the field and to be offering something with a level of detail and accuracy that you wouldn't find elsewhere. So you might wonder where all this comes from. So starting in the bottom right corner of the next slide, it starts off originally from our lived experience. We are disabled cyclists, and like all disabled people, we spend a lot of our time trying to problem solve all of the accessibility barriers that we have to navigate to do things that non-disabled people take for granted. So it's really about that sort of fundamental problem solving that is integral to disabled people's existence. But we don't do that on our own. We do that in combination with a whole other range of resources. So, for example, using research and reports, both by other disabled people's organisations like Transport for All and active travel organisations, including, and this is my new name for them, the organisation formerly known as SUSTRANS, because I haven't got my head around the WUCT, or however you say it as an abbreviation. But drawing on lots of research and evidence that is put together by organisations who have some shared goals. We look at national and international sources. So, for example, I guess loads of people on this call would be good friends of the Crow manual, that's used in the Netherlands. And then we bring all of this together and we consult, we collaborate, and we co-produce with allies, with other disabled people, and we test the things that we're devising, and we keep going until we think we've got really robust answers that are solving the main accessibility issues. And again, this is why we produce and update the Guide to Inclusive Cycling, because we're constantly developing new resources as knowledge and technology progresses. So I'm just going to show you a couple of my favourite sections of the guide. So starting on the right hand side is part of it that's, I guess, sort of evidence, information based, and it's a lovely graphic by my colleague Kate, who probably a lot of you will know. And it's just looking at all the different cycle types that are available, all the different kinds of configurations you can have in terms of number of wheels, number of people carried, the sitting position, the location of the brakes, e-assist or not, etc. And then the price range with that. And again, people who know anything about inclusive cycling will know that for disabled people to cycle, you're looking at a starting price of usually around £8,000 for a decent e-assist accessible cycle, which is beyond the means of the majority of disabled people, given the pay and employment gaps that we experience. So I really like that as a sort of example of some of the information that you can find in the guide. And then one of my other favourite sections is the infrastructure design. So just a couple of quick examples on this. So the first is just a headline sketch, literally, of some of the key features you would expect to see in accessible cycle infrastructure. So this is looking at where you have cycling and pedestrian infrastructure side by side or intersecting, and just some of the basics that make that properly accessible to people walking, wheeling and cycling. And then another favourite of mine, which is also in the infrastructure section and which we get asked about a lot, is accessible cycle parking. And this is for disabled people who use non-standard cycles as well as standard two-wheel bikes. And again, I'm using this as an example of just something where you can see there's just very clear guidance about widths, about lengths, about why you need colour contrast, and just making it very easy for someone, if you've got a few meters squared to put in some cycle parking, how you can make sure that there is provision that's accessible for disabled people. So while we have created the fifth guide to try and cover everything you need to know, the reality is that if we did that, we realised we were going to create a document that was thousands and thousands of pages long and that nobody was going to read. So what we've done is do, I guess, a sort of half and half. It's that the guide is sort of a quick tour of some of the headline topics that you need to think about and that need to be incorporated into making active travel fully accessible. But we haven't put the full detailed technical guidance in for each topic because it would just become completely unwieldy. So what you will need to do if you're using the guide is when you found a topic, maybe cycle parking, that you're really interested in, you will find links within that that take you to both our own detailed technical specifications, which are all also available on our resources pages, but we also provide links and resources to other external references that are useful. So for example, the Crow manual, if that's of interest. So we've tried to create a balance between covering everything, but not writing something that's thousands of pages long. There is also other stuff beyond the guide that, again, probably you're all familiar with in terms of some of the things that we do, but we have a whole range of resources available. We have case studies, news stories. You can sign up for inclusive cycle sessions if you or anyone you know is a disabled person is interested in cycling in London. We also have an inclusive cycle advisor who can signpost you for nationwide to where to access inclusive cycle centres. We have the Disabled Cycling Activists Network, shorthand DCAN, for disabled people and allies who want to campaign in their local area. We've got our photo bank of free to use, fully legally consented imagery of disabled people cycling. So you can always make sure that your presentations and policy has good range of diversity of people using a range of cycles. And then, of course, you can also contact us about any of our campaigns, any of the training or consultancy we offer. We collaborate with people on a range of projects from research to delivery, design, and so on. So please always get in touch with us about anything that's relevant. And then finally, one last thing from me, finally, it really is the end. And it kind of fits in with the news section. So we were really pleased to see that last week the government finally, at long last, announced a review of the legislation around mobility devices for disabled people, currently charmingly known as invalid carriages. But it's incredibly restrictive and means that a lot of the devices that disabled people would need to use to participate in active travel, so even things like power wheels for manual wheelchair, they're not currently legal to use in the public space because they're not an invalid carriage. So this is about to get changed. The consultation is out. The consultation questions themselves are not great. They're a little bit leading/misleading, but what we are doing is putting out a whole range of resources to guide people through the consultation and to point to the kind of things that we need to come out of that in order for disabled people to have the same kinds of options for active travel as non-disabled people. So the QR code on the screen will take you to our dedicated webpage for that consultation. It's open for 12 weeks and we'll be updating it every week. So please do, we really appreciate people being allies and supporting this. This is something we've been campaigning for quietly for a long time and then quite noisily after the Met Police confiscated someone's wheelchair because they had a non-legal power attachment on it. So yeah, this is really important in terms of disabled people's opportunities to use active travel. So I will stop talking now. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Kay. Excellent stuff. Really we've got a couple of questions I'll go to in just a second, but just a quick one from me, Kay. I think it'd be interesting if anybody, it'd be alarming if it's the case, but just in case, if anybody hasn't encountered the guide before, how much did it change over those 5 editions? Is this quite a fast-moving space that you're offering guidance on?
Yeah, so I'd say the changes from the 4th edition to this edition is definitely the expansion across the whole active travel arena rather than just cycling and micro-mobilities. And then also that in previous editions we have managed to include pretty much all of our technical guidance within the guide. the last 3 years of campaigns and policy has been something of an explosion of technical guidance, which was simply not possible to fit it all in. So yeah, we've got way more content than we've ever had, and that we could feasibly fit in. So yes, and I think the sort of moves around micro mobilities and where that sits in the active travel space is also moving things along quite rapidly as well.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thanks, Kay. Right, so I'm going to go to questions. I think to keep it social, if people don't mind, we might bring people off mute. I was going to stick to the Q&A function, but I'm breaking the rules. Robin's raising an eyebrow going, what's he doing? He's going off script. But I think it'd be fun to hear from people. So, Ruth, would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Fascinating stuff, and thank you very much. Will the guide be mandatory for all councils to follow? Will every council get it? Will government actually use it in their infrastructure guides? And can we look forward to it being properly done at all levels and not reliant on certain councils who are pro and other councils who don't want to even go there? Thank you, Kay.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thank you, Ruth. Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, so yes, I think in terms of the influence at national level, one of the things that the earlier editions of the guide really fed into was LTM 120. So things like the cycle design vehicle and the sort of specifications around infrastructure that must accommodate that. So we have seen our work feed in. Interestingly, the Guide to Inclusive Cycling also informs the New Zealand national government cycle design guidance, which we were very pleased to see that we're the main source that they've relied on. In terms of the situation in the UK, it's patchy. So we do have some local authorities who use our guidance, who get us to do access reviews. And what we tend to find is the ones that are doing really well will come to us and want to do it perfectly, or they've got a tricky environment with some restrictions in it and they're not sure how to manage the accessibility. So they will try and follow it to the letter and then come to us to help with a situation. And then the local authorities who really could do with doing anything don't tend to at all. So I think often we tend to sort of preach to the converted in a way, which is great because we see some really good stuff, but then also disappointing because it is really inconsistent across the country. So yeah, we would love it to be, and we would love the guidance, even LTM 120 and things like inclusive mobility, to be statutory, but of course they're not. And that's a real frustration as well, because it means it's only ever there as advisory rather than mandatory.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kay. Good stuff. I'm going to carry on in this vein. We've left the Q&A function long behind because it's more fun. Beth, did you want to come in and ask your question directly?
Potentially that leads in quite nicely, because currently our local authority is consulting Regulation 18 on the local plan. So I just wondered if you had any advice on what would be really good to see in from that. I'm thinking business and residential minimum inclusive cycle parking, but whether anything else springs to mind from people. And also that's an invitation if anyone wants to send me anything. Sorry, my dog's trying to make a bed over there. Just scratching.
Thanks, Beth.
I think so yeah. So what specifically are they looking at within that? Is it a consultation that's happening around a specific plan, or?
Yeah, so the local plan is the overall guidance document. I'm learning this myself for all the planning. So basically, I think it goes MPPF local plan. And basically, yeah, you can seems like it might be a real chance to Molly, stop it. A real chance to stipulate things, things like car parking spaces are in there. But I think things like accessible cycle in residential parking and things, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and I guess we always come at these kind of things in a couple of ways. So one, yeah, there's the specifics about if you're having cycle parking, then we recommend around 10% of that is accessible cycle parking. So there are sort of stipulations that you can make about that. The other thing we always, when something like this is being drafted or consulted on, is always remind people around obligations under the Equality Act and the public sector equality duty. And the public sector equality duty is important because it's not just about non-discrimination, it's about actively including the participation of people with protected characteristics. So that's disabled people, but all 9 protected characteristics, and making sure that all aspects of those of the plan has that inclusion and accessibility headlining it, and thinking about, well, how is this feature being considered in relation to those obligations. So doing both the sort of legal principle and then the examples of just concrete things that you could request within that. Another quite good document that we draw on a bit, and again we have loads of links to it in the guide in terms of things around active travel more broadly than cycling, but it's things about minimum pavement width, if EV charging, again loads of things that are being implemented in streets or are part of plans but tend not to be, the initial design tends not to be accessible.
Thanks, Kate. Brilliant advice. Right, we've got lots of hands up. That's exciting. Let's go to H. If everybody keeps their contributions really quick, so we can get more brain picking of Kate, because this is really valuable stuff. H, over to you.
Well, thanks, Kate. I'm glad you picked up on the Invalid Carriages Act of 1988, because there's various things that have happened there. Getting mobility devices onto buses and coaches. The CPT has produced a comprehensive policy on it, so you can get wheelchairs on and mobility aids onto buses and coaches. There's nothing out of National Rail. Amazing, it's staggering. The other thing, I'm a bit of a pavement nerd. I spent 10 years building pavements for Sustrans, and one of the things I picked up, I'm just rereading the Oxcam study for 5,000 cyclists, which goes back 20 years. Oxcam. And one of the big things was the pavement surface quality, embedded steelwork, tram tracks and such like that people get trapped in. And I've seen wheelchairs trapped in tram tracks as well because of the sheer way things are put together. How are we going to get competence out of people who do the risk assessment? In other words, it's meant to be a risk audit on any new roadworks, which should pick up things like steps in the footway, more than 6 millimeters, drop curves and things like that. I've got a lovely black eye at the moment, thanks to tripping over on a footway. So there's a lot of stuff we can do to make life easier for people to get around and make the gaps competent. The gap you have to get through, the minimum is 80 centimeters, which is why the throat on a bus is 80 centimeters wide. And there's other techniques and a whole load of stuff to go through. I would love to be talking about it, but I'm going to be cut off because TLDR.
Okay, thanks, H. That's great. Kate, broadly, that competency challenge from H there, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's really frustrating, and I think part of the problem is that there is not enough diversity in the transport sector, and that so much of transport is designed with really outdated presumptions and guidance about disabled people, the kinds of mobility devices disabled people use, how and why disabled people move around. I mean, so much of it is based on the assumption that if you're a disabled person, you're not making an essential journey, you're traveling with a non-disabled person who is your carer. And again, that just doesn't speak to disabled people's lives. A really high proportion of disabled women are carers for other disabled people and or children, and yet no public transport infrastructure accommodates a disabled carer of other people and or children in it. So yeah, we need more diversity. I mean, there is a campaign at the moment around making transport accessible that's based on a Canadian model, which is pushing for, and it sounds, I mean, it's immense because I don't know how you make everything accessible, but it puts a deadline on accessibility, and basically bit by bit there are co-produced agreed standards of accessibility for every element of transport, and a commitment that they will be implemented by a certain date. And I think that is the way to solve the problem, because the design then comes from disabled people using transport, not what transport designers think disabled people want or need or do.
Thanks, Kay. Right, Mark, is that you up the under the transportation initiatives? I think that's you, isn't it, Mark? I couldn't tell. I saw somebody walking outside wearing a raincoat. Did you want to come in?
It is me, and I'm trying to get a disabled ramp to work at this moment in a community centre, which isn't working. So one of the things I was going to say is things that are provided need to work. But my question was actually about liaisons with other disability groups, because I in work with some of the disability groups here.
We're having Mark. Could you manage to get somewhere quiet? Because I think
Yes, hold on a second. I'm just
struggling to hear you.
I'll just rush outside. Hold on.
I'm enjoying the Annika Rice roving reporter kind of model, but it's.
How's this?
Oh, now we've lost your signal. We can't win here. You're going to have to text it in.
I'm going to mute him if that's okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, Adam, you're so strict. Oh, he's back. No, he's not. Mark will come back to you. Matthew, did you want to come in?
Thank you for that. Really great, Kay. The amazing work that Wellbeing do. I sort of at one remove help people access active travel in Darlington. I have to be careful, take my councillor hat off and then put it back on again. But the much sadly lost heavy metal hand cyclist was a great inspiration. I do use pro forma letters to this day. I just wanted to double check, Kate, are the resources that he produced that were absolutely perfect, are they being preserved? And is there maybe a similar resource, because your organisation is very well known, and I was wondering if there was a way you could magpie, with all due respect and crediting, the resources that were produced, the freedom of information request, the wording, and the letter before action, etc. Or am I just painfully ignorant and you already have those all in place and I just need to go and do some research?
So yes, we do have how to do freedom of information requests and how to use them. I think we have. So I don't know if Richard's original resources are archived anywhere, but I do remember when he passed away, there was a whole discussion about that, but that archive doesn't sit with us, but I think it does exist. We did update some of those resources, so they're not his original. We don't on our website have things like a letter before action, because we do have to be careful about not giving legal advice, because obviously while we can give campaigning advice and we can provide resources, we do have to draw a clear line. We do have some information resources that was put together with Lee Day around campaigning around barrier removal, and you will also find that on the resources page of our website. Our website is a little bit of a mess at the moment, and it is slowly getting figured out. Most of our stuff is on the resources page, so you will find pretty much everything you need there, and links to other key things like the guide and the current campaign around the invalid carriage legislation.
Thanks, Kay. Right, should we give Mark another bash? Mark Strong, in you come.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I'm on my own Wi-Fi, sorry. So what happens at community centres? So when I work with some various disability groups in Brighton here and other places, there's often a feeling that this is not the core issue. And there's quite a lot of people who see basically blue badge parking and driving as more of an issue. Somewhat disappointing, but also understandable in some ways. How can we work with these groups to be more allies and not set up this, well, it's the same as society in more general terms, who see driving as a norm?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think part of the problem for disabled people is if you're a disabled person who can drive and has access to a car, honestly, that is pretty much the only way you can get a decent distance when you need to go, when you want, get there on time without other people interfering or messing up your journey or making it difficult. And I think, and the other thing I'd say about driving for disabled people, it also makes you, until you get out your car, you're invisible as a disabled person. And also, given the level of harassment or hostility or prejudice disabled people encounter in public, that is also a really important feature of it. So I think if we want to change that, it's like, I think people get it the wrong way around. It's like trying to say, oh, you could give up your car and get a cycle and it would all be great. It's like, actually, let's be really good allies to disabled people. Let's really show that we're working to make public transport better, to challenge inaccessibility, to make sure there is really good quality provision everywhere. And then disabled people will be trusting enough to give up their cars or to feel less like that is the only option. But I think asking people to make a leap of faith when normally when we're asked to trust that something is accessible, it's usually not. It just goes against our whole experience. So and again, that's the thing why it's so important for non-disabled people's organisations and groups to be really good allies, because when disabled people see we're not just having to have the same old fight, like beating your head against a brick wall on our own, that other people are doing stuff, they get it, they're trying to make it better, then it would create that sort of environment where, okay, maybe I will think about trying to cycle or not use the car or use public transport because I've seen how much it's changing. But yeah, until there is a radical change in public transport and public attitudes towards disabled people as well, it's a lot to ask people to deprioritize a car.
Thanks, Kay. Beautifully put. So, Bob, we've got three people left, and then we'll wrap up and go off and have our tea. Bob, did you want to come in and ask Kay a question?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the issue is what we see, for example, and we've discussed it on Active Travel Cafe before about barriers on off-road routes, is that these forms of obstacle are actually against the relevant legislation covering disabled people. But how do we actually operate when we've got good guidelines, good suggestions about what to do, but the highway authority hasn't got the money, or it's too difficult, or you have to take out a parking space, blah, 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 blah. How do you get beyond the actual good quality guidelines to saying, hey, come on, this is against the legislation? And does that actually work? So that's the first thing I wanted to say. I also wanted to say something about the problems of disabled drivers, but let's just leave it at that.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Kay.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And again, legal challenge around barriers is something that we know has happened in different areas. Part of the problem is that a local authority tends to back down before there is a legal precedent set. So it's about individual people or campaigning groups in areas starting to take legal action because the barrier violates the Equality Act, the local authority won't move it, it starts getting close to trial, and then they sort of back down and remove it. But I mean, one, it's a very time consuming and costly way of doing it. And two, it doesn't create that legal precedent. On the other hand, there is Wales. So Wales is a lot of good news stories coming from Wales. But we were recently involved in a campaign in Flintshire to remove barriers along part of a coastal path. And that was a collaboration between local people, different organisations. Flintshire then agreed that they would remove it county-wide, and now it looks like that is going into the national policy. So I think one of the other ways we do it is when we have particularly a devolved region who is really leading the way, so like 20 miles an hour barrier removal, and that then becomes a real lobbying force. So it's a bit of sometimes pushing legal action and sometimes just kind of shaming people by, well, look, they're doing it in Wales, why can't we do it here?
Thanks, Kay. Adam.
Yeah, I just want to go back on. I think guidance. It is guidance because I've seen stuff being used, for example, LTM 120, to try and prevent introduction of infrastructure. So making perfect the enemy of good. Yeah, so I think we need to be very clear that guidance, there are compromises at every stage. But then the second thing I want that was more of a statement, but I was wondering, have you looked at the connectivity metric that the DfT have released, which I think it looks at different areas based on how well they're connected to health care, employment. And I was wondering whether or not it needs an accessibility sort of aspect to it, because I think otherwise you just end up with, if you even look at the public transport analysis that they have one, they look at it, or overall, they exclude car use because car use is always scored pretty much above 80% or 80 scoring out of 100, whereas everything else can drop down to about 20 or 10 in some instances. And I was wondering if there's any work going on there to kind of influence that.
Yeah, I mean, we had a look at it. There's two connectivity tools came out similar. We looked at both and sort of cried a bit. And then, I mean, we're a very small team. We would love to. Unfortunately, we don't have the capacity for that to be a priority at the moment. But absolutely, it doesn't make sense in terms of disabled people's experiences or journeys at all. So yeah, it's definitely something that needs a thorough accessibility review and headline metric within it. I would just say on the statement about the guidance, it's like, yeah, there is often a tension between, what is LTN 120 best practice standard, which is fully accessible for everybody, and then constraints within a particular environment. I guess what we would always encourage is where there are constraints that make it actually physically impossible to do best practice, is to do a proper review of what is going to be put in place and make sure that it is accessible or there is an alternative, because otherwise it's journey ending for disabled people. And I think that's very often what people forget. It's like, oh, well, it's just one difficult bit at this one point in it. But actually, if you're a disabled person, that's it. You're just going to have to turn around and go home, and you might not be able to turn around because it might be a very narrow piece of infrastructure, and your cycle has a big turning radius, so you might just be stuck there. So yeah, it's that thing about when there are constraints. It's again, accessibility should be a headline, and there are usually ways that you can work that so there is an accessible option to continue that journey, so it doesn't have to be journey ending. And that's what we'd really encourage in those situations.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kay. Kay, you've been doing so well. There's a lot of questions been fired at you. You're going to be exhausted after all this. So we've just got one left. Save the best till last. Ali Campion from Walk Wheel Cycle Trust, or as we now have to call them, TOFCAS, the organisation formerly known as Sustrans. So, Ali, did you want to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you. I've popped this kind of a little bit in the chat as well, but yeah, at Walk Wheel Cycle Trust, or the artist formerly known as Sustrans, we're working with Activity Alliance, who are also on the call, on a bit of a project around kind of behaviour change and engaging with disabled people, neurodiverse people, people with long-term health conditions, things like that. And I was so excited to see the stuff in your guide about like cycle centres and things like that. I run an active travel centre in Gateshead, which unfortunately isn't as inclusive as we'd like at the moment. So that guidance is going to be really helpful. I was wondering if, as part of kind of the engagement around the guide, you got any feedback from participants about their experience of kind of being able to go and use an inclusive or like an adapted or non-standard cycle in that like drop-in session, almost as like a leisure activity, and what the barriers are between that and kind of ingraining that habit as like active travel rather than purely a leisure activity?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and I guess that is part of the reason why we exist as a campaigning organization, is that what we found from our own inclusive cycle centres and all the others that we work with is that, very often disabled people have never had the opportunity to try out a whole range of accessible cycles. Usually people think cycling is a two-wheel bike, and if you can't ride a two-wheel bike, you can't cycle. Interestingly, just fun fact, cycling was actually invented by a disabled man in 1655, and the first ever cycle was a hand cycle. So bicycles are adapted hand cycles, not the other way around. Anyway, so yeah, what we find is disabled people find cycling. It's an amazing experience. It's health, it's physical health, mental health. You can move, and it has the potential to be autonomous transport. And again, we live in a world where autonomous movement for disabled people is so rare. We're so confined by all these barriers and constraints that if you can cycle a journey, it just gives you back unparalleled freedom. But the transition to learning to cycle at an inclusive cycle centre and getting a cycle and cycling independently are huge. Infrastructure, cycle infrastructure is one of them, and obviously we know that puts off a whole range of people from cycling, so not just disabled people but older people, in particular women as well. So there's those problems about not being safe to cycle in public. And then the other main issue is the cost of non-standard cycles and having somewhere safe to park and store them, both at home and at destinations. Because if you've just spent £8 on an ice trike, you're not going to lock it up on a bent piece of metal that's half bolted into the wall and think that's safe cycle parking. So those are the huge barriers, and that's also where we think the hire and loan schemes can provide a really important bridge, because they're overcoming the cost barrier. You don't have to buy it, and also you don't have to have somewhere safe to indoors and all those things you need to keep it at home. And also it's someone else's problem if there's a puncture or a breakdown or it needs maintenance and repair, because again, as a disabled person, you can't just get off and walk your cycle to the nearest bike shop, which is probably inaccessible, and if it's Halfords, probably upstairs. So yeah, that it's that, from that learning to cycle to integrating it into everyday life, and it's those barriers and those share loans, as well as things like funding for disabled people to have cycles, are crucial. And again, a bit of a good news on that. We know that high trans in Scotland, so because there's been a change about how the transport regions are divided up, high trans in Scotland, which is the Highlands area, now has a scheme where for £25 a month, a disabled person can hire or lease, I guess, on a long-term basis, a cycle of their choice, have it maintained and repaired, and that's all part of the delivery of their active travel plan. So something like that is something that we think is amazing and could again really help to bridge that gap.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kate. Well, listen, we need to give you a chance to rest after that. Well, I think we should describe it as a tour de force, frankly. You covered a huge amount. You went way beyond the guide, let's face it. We grilled you senseless, and we've learned so much. That's been an amazing session, it really has. So lots of rounds of applause coming from everybody. Big love hearts, you name it. There's a whole lot of love going on. That's amazing. And we all go away with a mind bomb, fascinating fact that all of us are cycling on adapted hand bicycles. So there you go. You heard it here. Kate, thank you so much. That's been brilliant. And hopefully, as a result, more people will be using your guide from tonight. So thanks so much. Listen, everybody, I'm going to wrap us up in 2 seconds. Just a quick plug for next week. Please do join us. We will have Alice Ferguson and Ingrid Skills, founders of the contemporary Play Streets movement, presenting 10 learnings from 16 years of playing out. So please do come. And yes, it's Ranty Highwomen will also be on, talking about the good, the bad, and the interesting, which is always worth tuning in for. Kay, rejoin us. You'd love it. If you think H is a pavement nerd, you've seen nothing. So please do join us next week. And in the meantime, please, thanks again, Kay, and everybody have a lovely evening. Take care, everybody.
Hey.
Thank you. Bye.